There's this small amber lamp on our kitchen counter. It's nothing special, just something we picked up at a flea market on a rainy Sunday, years ago. It used to glow warm every morning when I came down to make coffee. It made the whole kitchen feel like home. I didn't notice it at first, but one morning, a few weeks ago, the light wasn't on. And neither was she. She was there, Marian was physically there, curled up on the couch with her knees tucked to her chest, but something in her had gone dim. She didn't look up when I said good morning. She didn't ask if I wanted oatmeal like she used to. No smile. No nod. Just silence. At first, I thought she was just tired. Or maybe had a bad dream. But the next day was the same. And the one after that. I tried to break through it gently. A warm breakfast. Her favorite music playing low while she got ready for work. I bought the scented candle she always stops to sniff in the store but never buys. I left it in the bathroom with a little note. For my forever girl. She never lit it. It sounds small, I know. But after 14 years together, you notice the little things first. The shift in temperature before the storm hits. The way her eyes stopped meeting mine. The way her goodnight faded into a closed door. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cold. She was gone. I told myself it was just a phase. I even started setting the amber lamp on a timer so the kitchen would still glow in the morning. I thought maybe, just maybe, if things looked the same, she'd start to feel the same. But nothing changed. I'd ask, "Are you okay?" And she'd nod, barely. I'd ask, "Did I do something wrong?" And she'd say, "No," like the word cost her energy she didn't have. Sometimes I'd catch her staring out the window at nothing in particular. Once, I asked what she was thinking about. She said, "I don't know," and left the room. It was the kind of silence that made you feel invisible. Not punished, just unneeded. I kept showing up. I still made her coffee. Still left her notes. Still kissed her on the shoulder when I passed behind her. But she never responded. Not with words. Not even a glance. Weeks passed. I stopped setting the timer on the lamp. I think that's when I started to realize it wasn't just a bad week or some temporary distance. Something inside her had shifted, and she didn't want me to follow. I was still sleeping in the same bed as my wife. But I'd never felt so alone. And then came that one morning, the morning everything inside me finally went quiet too. But I'll get to that. This is only the beginning. There's a strange kind of heaviness that settles into a house when two people are pretending not to notice each other fading. Not a dramatic explosion. Not a betrayal written in fire. Just an unraveling you feel in your bones, in the spaces where words used to live. Every morning after that, I woke up before the alarm. I'd lie there next to Marian, watching the early light creep through the curtains and cast soft shadows across her back. Her breathing stayed steady, but she never shifted toward me anymore. Not even in sleep. I used to feel the warmth of her feet brushing mine under the covers, instinctively seeking out my body in the dark. Now, there was space between us. Literal, emotional, spiritual space. I started keeping a journal, nothing poetic or polished, just small lines scribbled late at night when I couldn't sleep. She didn't eat the soup I made. She wore makeup today but didn't look at me. I said, "I love you," and she nodded while checking her phone. Those notes weren't for her. They were for me. Proof that I wasn't going crazy. That something real had shifted, even if no one was saying it out loud. The hardest part wasn't the coldness, it was the quiet almosts. The moments when it looked like she might say something. Her mouth would open slightly as if words were forming, but then they'd retreat. Like she changed her mind. Like she'd weighed whether I was worth the effort and decided against it. And every time she didn't speak, it felt like another nail in a coffin I wasn't ready to admit existed. We still had dinner together most nights, though the conversation had thinned to nothing. Sometimes I'd talk about work just to fill the air. I'd say something mildly funny or self-deprecating, and she'd offer a faint smile more polite than sincere. Other times, she'd just scroll her phone with her fork paused mid-air, like I was background noise. One night, I knocked over my glass, and the water spilled across the table. She barely flinched. Just got up, grabbed a towel, and wiped it like she was cleaning a stranger's mess. I kept thinking about the lamp. That little amber light used to mean we were still trying. That warmth and safety still lived in our kitchen, even if the world outside felt chaotic. But now, it was just another object collecting dust. Like the wedding photo on the bookshelf. Like our unused camping gear in the garage. Like us. One Saturday afternoon, I found her in the guest room organizing old photo albums. She hadn't said where she was going, hadn't asked if I wanted to join. She just drifted upstairs after breakfast. When I walked in, she was sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping slowly through pages filled with smiles and squinting eyes and windblown hair. I sat on the edge of the bed, quietly, watching her fingers pause over a picture of us on a canoe trip from 10 years ago. We were soaked, laughing, and holding hands. I asked, gently, "Do you remember that day?" She didn't look up, just nodded and said, "Yeah." Nothing more. Not, "That was such a great trip." Not, "You were so awful at paddling." Just, "Yeah." And then she closed the album and stood up to leave. I sat there long after she left the room, staring at the half-closed album as if it might open on its own and explain what went wrong. But of course, it didn't. And she didn't come back. That night, we didn't talk at all. I don't think we even made eye contact. I told myself people go through phases. That marriages sometimes drift and come back stronger. That maybe she was battling something internal and didn't know how to ask for help. But the more I tried to reach her, the further away she felt. Like trying to hold fog in your hands. It looks close. It looks soft. But it slips through your fingers every time. That week, I stopped leaving notes. I stopped lighting candles or bringing home flowers or checking if she wanted tea before bed. Not out of anger. Not even sadness. But because I realized I was the only one still speaking into the silence, and it was starting to echo back as self-doubt. I had a dream that night, one of those vivid, unsettling ones. In it, I was walking through our house, but everything was packed in boxes. Every room, every drawer, every picture. And I was holding a key in my hand, but all the doors were locked from the inside. I woke up with the taste of dust in my mouth and a strange ache in my chest. That morning, she stood by the window while brushing her hair. The sun made her look almost translucent, like she could vanish at any moment. I said her name quietly, just to hear it spoken out loud. "Marian." She didn't turn. She didn't need to. Because that was the moment I knew. I could disappear, and she might not even notice. Or worse, she might notice, and still say nothing at all. And something inside me shifted. Not in anger. Not in grief. In understanding. This was no longer about waiting for her to come back. This was the beginning of me learning how to leave. There's something odd about silence when it goes on too long. It starts to feel alive. Like it listens to you, follows you from room to room, breathes just behind your shoulder. I didn't notice it at first, not really. It was subtle, like a crack behind the wallpaper or the ticking of a watch that only becomes loud when you're alone with it. But once you hear it, you can't unhear it. The silence between Marian and me had become a presence in our home, one that shaped itself around everything we didn't say. Every cupboard she closed gently, every night she slipped into bed without a word. It added to this quiet hum of disconnection that buzzed beneath the surface of our routines. We still lived together, still shared meals, still folded laundry and paid bills, but our lives were now running parallel instead of intertwined. I could be 5 feet away from her and still feel like I was standing on the opposite side of a canyon. One evening, I stayed late at work on purpose. I had nothing urgent to do, just rearranged files, cleaned out an old drawer, made myself a second cup of coffee I didn't even want. It felt safer than going home. When I finally walked through the door, the house was dim. The only light came from the TV in the living room, playing some home renovation show she used to love. Marian was there on the couch, legs tucked up beneath her, eyes glassy and fixed on the screen, but I could tell she wasn't really watching. I said, "Hey," soft, almost testing the air like someone knocking gently on a door they're not sure they're welcome to open. She didn't respond. I stood there for a moment, holding my briefcase, the door still cracked behind me, wondering if she even realized I had spoken. Finally, I just set it down, walked into the kitchen, and began making myself dinner. I didn't ask if she'd eaten. I didn't ask if she wanted anything. I simply opened the fridge, pulled out what I needed, and cooked in silence, the way one might cook in a stranger's home. The next morning, I watched her through the reflection of the bathroom mirror. She moved with such precision, brushing her teeth, tying her robe, smoothing her hair into a bun. It was like watching someone play the part of a wife in a film, except I wasn't in the scene anymore. I was the cameraman, invisible, capturing her from a distance. There was no tension, no fight, just vacancy. A perfectly polite absence. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't harsh. She just wasn't there. I think what struck me the most was how normal everything looked. We still had our routines. The dishwasher still ran at night. The mail still got sorted on the hallway table. The neighbors still waved from across the street. But underneath that surface normalcy was a kind of emotional erosion, like the foundation of our relationship had been eaten away little by little while I wasn't paying attention. I started noticing the things she no longer did. She stopped making our Sunday morning pancakes. She stopped wearing the cozy socks I bought her last Christmas. She used to hum while brushing her hair. Now she was silent. She used to kiss me on the cheek when I handed her a mug of coffee. Now she took it without a glance. It was death by 1,000 absences. One Saturday afternoon, I tried. I truly tried. I asked her if she wanted to go for a drive, maybe get lunch out of town like we used to. I said, we haven't done that in a while, hoping the nostalgia might pull something out of her. She looked up from her tablet, paused for half a second, and said, I've got a lot to do around here. No explanation. No counteroffer. Just that. She didn't look angry. She didn't even seem irritated. She seemed uninterested. And for the first time, it hit me like a stone to the chest. She no longer wanted to make memories with me. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed while she read quietly under the lamp. I watched her flip each page with mechanical grace, like the book was more alive to her than I was. I opened my mouth, intending to ask something, anything. I didn't even know what. Maybe, do you still love me? Maybe, are we okay? But I couldn't form the words. I just sat there, frozen between hope and resignation, listening to the soft whisper of the pages as they turned. She didn't look up. She just turned off her light, rolled away, and went asleep. I lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above us. I thought about how many hours I'd spent trying to fix what I couldn't name. I thought about the way I used to dream with her beside me, the way her laughter used to fill the corners of our home, the way she used to trace circles on my chest when we talked late into the night. And I realized how long it had been since I'd felt that version of her. That version of us. The house was quiet. But it wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. And in that hollowness, something inside me finally began to loosen, some thread I'd been gripping too tightly for too long. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I was just tired. And in that moment, without saying a word, I began to understand the difference between giving up and letting go. I remember sitting in my parked car one evening, engine off, keys still in my hand, watching the light from our living room flicker softly behind the curtains. It was one of those moments when you feel like a stranger outside your own life, hesitant to cross the threshold not because of fear, but because of what isn't waiting on the other side. I could see Marion's shadow pass by the window briefly. She didn't know I was out there. I could have just driven off, and she probably wouldn't have noticed. And that thought settled in me like dust on an untouched shelf, soft, quiet, but undeniably present. The truth is, by that point, the absence between us had started to feel like a third presence in the home. It lived with us. It sat between us on the couch. It slept in the bed where neither of us reached for the other anymore. I found myself doing strange things just to fill the space, rearranging the spice rack alphabetically, vacuuming the same hallway twice, memorizing useless trivia just to keep my mind busy. I began looking for signs, little cracks in the stillness that might point to something deeper. Not in a paranoid way, but the way someone stares at a painting for too long, trying to understand the story behind the brushstrokes. I'd catch her staring at her phone for long stretches, a faint smile sometimes tugging at the corner of her mouth. She'd quickly lock the screen when I walked by, then pretend to scroll through something else. I didn't ask questions. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. But those little moments stacked up, one after the other, until the weight of them was too hard to ignore. She'd started staying out a bit later than usual. Not drastically, just an extra 30 minutes here, an hour there. A vague ran into someone from work, or needed to clear my head. Again, nothing concrete. Nothing I could challenge. Just enough to make me question my own instincts. But the truth is, I wasn't even angry. I wasn't jealous. I wasn't heartbroken. What I felt was worse. I felt unnecessary. Like I'd been gently pushed out of a life I helped build, replaced not with a person, but with indifference. There was a moment one night when we were brushing our teeth side by side. We both stood in silence, each staring at our own reflection. And it hit me, I don't think she even saw me anymore. Not the way a person sees someone they love. I was just there, part of the bathroom, part of the routine, part of the furniture. One weekend, I suggested we drive out to the coast. Just the two of us. We used to do that every fall, drive the same winding road, stop for coffee at the same tiny gas station with the crooked sign, take the same photo on the same rock by the water. It was our little ritual, unspoken but deeply ours. When I brought it up, she looked up from her tablet and said, I don't really feel up for it this year. That was it. No, maybe next weekend. No warmth. Just a polite decline, like I'd asked a coworker to join me for lunch, and they had better plans. That night I lay awake again, watching the ceiling, thinking about how a home can still carry the shape of a life that's no longer being lived. The pictures on the wall, The familiar creak in the hallway, the mug she always used, they all whispered of something that used to be real. But the people inside it were ghosts now, occupying space, avoiding truth, drifting. I found an old video on my phone from 3 years back. We were at a friend's barbecue. The sun was golden. Marian had a beer in one hand and was dancing barefoot in the grass. She was laughing, not the polite chuckle she gave me these days, but a full, uncontrolled laugh that made her eyes squint and her head tilt back. I watched it over and over, trying to find some thread of connection between the woman in that video and the one asleep next to me now, turned away, cocooned in her own silence. The more I watched, the more I realized. I didn't just miss her. I missed the way she made me feel. Seen. Wanted. Alive. A few mornings later, I stood by the sink, coffee in hand, staring out at the backyard. The trees were starting to turn, that golden, rusty orange that always makes the air feel nostalgic. Marian walked in, said nothing, poured her tea, and sat at the table. We sat there together, not speaking, not touching, not even exchanging glances. And in that moment, I realized how terrifyingly easy it is for two people to drift so far apart while sitting just feet from each other. She eventually stood, said, "I've got to get going," and left. Not rudely, not coldly, just normally. Like this version of us was completely acceptable. Like the silence between us had always been there. And as the door closed behind her, I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel shocked. I felt numb. That afternoon, I stayed home from work. I walked through each room of the house slowly, as if I were seeing it for the first time. I touched the banister she used to lean against when she laughed. I ran my fingers across the throw blanket she used to fall asleep under while watching her favorite shows. I sat at the kitchen table where we used to plan trips, discuss budgets, argue about paint colors, dream about the future. But all of it felt like a museum now, still full of artifacts, but long empty of life. And then, without planning to, I did something that felt both insignificant and enormous. I went to the bedroom, pulled out an old duffel bag from the closet, and laid it open on the bed. I didn't pack anything yet. I didn't make any declarations. I just sat there, staring at the empty bag, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of years pressed down on my chest. It wasn't a decision. Not yet. But it was the first step toward one. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes with emotional fatigue. Not the kind that hits you all at once like a slap, but the kind that drips into your consciousness slowly, like water wearing down stone. After weeks of walking through a house that no longer felt like home, I started to realize that love doesn't always vanish in some dramatic moment. Sometimes, it just wears out. Quietly. Softly. Until you're left with two people who still know how to live around each other, but not with each other. The day after I laid out the duffel bag, I didn't do anything with it. I zipped it closed, slid it back under the bed, and went on like nothing had changed. But inside, something had. I was beginning to make space, not on the shelf or in the drawer, but in my mind. Space for the idea that maybe this wasn't a phase. That maybe what we were waiting to fix was already broken in ways we couldn't name. Marian, for her part, seemed entirely unaware. Or maybe she knew, and simply didn't care to engage. She still went about her routine with quiet efficiency. She folded laundry with perfect creases. She organized the pantry alphabetically. She laughed when her phone pinged and scrolled with her lips pressed together in a faint, private smile. She moved through our shared space with the grace of someone who wasn't really there anymore, like a ghost performing a role for memory's sake. One evening, I tried to break through the veil. I asked her if she wanted to watch something, just a simple, casual invitation. Something we hadn't done in months. Her response was quick, automatic. "I'm tired." And maybe she was. Maybe she really had a long day. But I heard more in those two words than she probably intended. I heard tired of me. Tired of pretending. Tired of the effort it would take to pretend we were still us. I didn't press. I just nodded and turned back to my book. But I didn't read a single word. That weekend, we had dinner with friends, a couple we used to see all the time. There was laughter, wine, the clink of silverware, the warmth of nostalgia in the air. Marian was charming. She smiled. She told stories. She touched my arm when she spoke like we were still that couple everyone envied. But there was a hollowness to it, at least for me. When we got home, I said, "You seemed happy tonight." She shrugged, kicked off her shoes, and replied, "It was nice to feel normal for once." And there it was. That word. Normal. Not joyful. Not connected. Not close. Just normal. Like that was the best we could hope for now. I went to bed before her that night, something I rarely did. I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the things I hadn't said, the questions I never asked because I was too afraid of the answers, the conversations we never had because we were both too polite, too passive, too exhausted to fight for something that might already be gone. I thought about the way I used to reach for her hand in public, not out of habit, but because I needed to feel her fingers laced in mine. I thought about how I used to plan little surprises, her favorite pastry from the bakery, a note in her bag, a song left playing in the car. And I thought about how long it had been since she'd noticed any of that, or if she even cared. There were times, brief flashes, when I considered asking her outright, "Are you in love with someone else?" But the words always died in my throat. Not because I didn't want the truth, but because I was afraid she'd look me in the eye and say, "No, I'm just not in love with you." And that, somehow, would have hurt more. So instead, we kept circling each other. She'd yawn and go to bed. I'd stay up late cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. She'd hum quietly while folding towels. I'd watch her from across the room, wondering what she was thinking about, wondering if she even noticed me noticing her. One night, something small happened that shook me more than it should have. I sneezed, a loud, sudden sneeze in the middle of the quiet kitchen. And she didn't say, "Bless you." Not even a glance. It's such a tiny thing, almost laughable in its insignificance. But for some reason, it broke something loose in me. Because saying "bless you" is automatic. It's muscle memory. It's what you say even to strangers. And the fact that she didn't say it, didn't even look up, made me realize just how far we drifted from even basic connection. That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror after she'd gone to sleep and asked myself, out loud, "Is this love?" And I didn't recognize the face staring back at me. It wasn't anger I saw in my eyes. It wasn't even grief. It was absence. And the mirror didn't answer back. There was a Tuesday when I woke up and simply didn't care if I packed a lunch. I know that sounds trivial, maybe even ridiculous, but for the last 14 years of my marriage, I had packed a lunch almost every workday. Sometimes Marian made it for me. A sandwich, a small note, a piece of fruit I never ate. And then, when she stopped, I kept doing it myself, partly out of habit and partly because it made me feel like someone still cared, even if that someone was just me. But that Tuesday morning, I stood in the kitchen in front of the open fridge and thought, what's the point? And I walked away. I didn't realize at the time how significant that moment would be. How that single, quiet decision, to leave the fridge door open for an extra beat and walk out of the house empty-handed, marked the first honest movement inside me in weeks, maybe months. Because I wasn't pretending anymore, not even to myself. Work passed in a haze. I answered emails, nodded through meetings, stared at my monitor like it had something important to say. But really, I was somewhere else entirely. Not daydreaming, not distracted, just flat. Like I was watching my own life from a step outside of it, waiting for someone to notice I didn't belong in the picture anymore. That evening, when I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. I sat there for a while, engine running, the soft hum of the car offering more comfort than anything waiting inside. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen if I didn't go in. I was more curious, like someone peering into a room they've seen 1,000 times but never really looked at. Marian was in the kitchen when I walked in. The dishwasher was running. The air smelled faintly of ginger. She didn't turn when I entered. Just said, "Hey," without looking. It was the same "hey" you'd give a neighbor or a distant relative at a reunion, polite, emotionless, automatic. I wanted to ask her something. Anything. But instead, I walked past her, grabbed a glass of water, and sat at the table. There was a time when we would talk about our days, really talk. She'd tell me about the woman in her office who always brought tuna for lunch, or the client who insisted on emailing in all caps. I'd share stories about the guy 2 cubicles over who played air drums while wearing headphones. But now, we sat in the same space with nothing left to say. Or maybe too much. Eventually, I said, "Do you ever feel like we're just roommates?" She looked at me for a second, really looked, which surprised me, and then turned back to rinsing a pan. "I've been feeling that way for a while," she said, her voice barely above the sound of water. And that was it. No elaboration, no emotion, just a quiet admission, dropped into the room like a stone in a still pond. I nodded slowly, more to myself than to her. I didn't ask why she hadn't said anything sooner. I didn't accuse her of anything. I didn't beg for a solution. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't searching for answers anymore. I was just trying to understand what was left. Later that night, I sat outside on the back steps, wrapped in a blanket we'd bought together at a crafts fair years ago. It still smelled faintly like cedar. The air was cool, the kind of cool that feels like a warning of seasons changing. I watched the sky fade from gray to black and listened to the wind shuffle the branches in our oak tree. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A neighbor's TV flickered in the window next door. Life was happening all around me, familiar, quiet, persistent, and I felt more like an observer than a participant. I think that's when I started to feel the grief. Not the grief of something ending violently, but the grief of something slowly slipping away while you stood by and let it. The grief of realizing that the person you once shared everything with had been quietly building a life without you, even while sharing the same roof, the same meals, the same bed. There was no anger in me. That surprised me. I thought I'd feel betrayed, or bitter, or humiliated. But mostly, I felt tired. Not physically. I could run a marathon if it meant not sitting in that kitchen one more night pretending we were still okay. No, it was something deeper. Soul-tired. The kind of tired that makes you stop trying to force a smile. The kind of tired that lets silence stay when it enters the room. Before heading inside that night, I looked up at the stars. I used to trace constellations with Marion. We'd lie on the hood of the car and name them ourselves, never the real names, just ours. That's the bread slice, I'd say, pointing. You mean Orion? She'd laugh. Nope. Bread slice. Clearly. I don't know why that memory came back to me right then, but it hit me so hard. I had to sit down. It wasn't the memory itself that broke me. It was knowing that somewhere along the way, we stopped looking up. I went to bed without brushing my teeth. She was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her back was to me, the same way it always was now. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before turning out the light, wondering how two people could spend over a decade learning every detail about each other, their favorite songs, their weird food preferences, the way they cried during movie trailers, and still end up like this. The next morning, I got up early. I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection without flinching. I noticed the lines that hadn't been there before. The fatigue under my eyes. The way my mouth sat in a neutral line, like it had forgotten how to smile naturally. And in that stillness, I asked myself a quiet, serious question. If this isn't where you belong anymore, then why are you still here? And for the first time, I didn't have an excuse ready. It was a Thursday morning when I realized I had stopped hoping for things to get better. That kind of hope, the soft, aching kind that clings to you through bad weeks and tired dinners, had been slowly bleeding out of me for longer than I wanted to admit. I wasn't waiting for Marion to come back to me anymore. Not really. I was waiting to feel like I existed again. And the truth is, I hadn't felt that in a long time. She walked past me in the hallway that morning, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, her eyes barely lifting to acknowledge I was even there. Her hair was still damp from the shower, her robe pulled loosely around her. I stood at the counter holding a bowl of cereal I didn't want to eat, and I watched her walk away like I was watching someone else's life. Not in anger, not even sadness. Just that same growing distance, playing out in tiny, silent routines. I went upstairs and opened the closet. I didn't pack. I didn't even touch the bag. I just stared at the space between my jackets and her sweaters, wondering how long it had been since either of us noticed that our things no longer smelled like each other. When was the last time she borrowed one of my shirts? Or asked where her scarf was? These little things, once so natural, had vanished without ceremony. That day at work, I left early without telling anyone. I didn't even bring my laptop home. I drove to a bookstore we used to go to, a small, independent place on the edge of town with creaky floors and handwritten signs taped to the shelves. We hadn't been there in years. The same old man still worked behind the counter, humming a jazz tune I didn't recognize. I walked the aisle slowly, letting my fingers brush over the spines, not reading anything, just searching for something familiar. Something that might remind me of who I used to be before I became invisible inside my own life. I bought a notebook. Just a simple one. Brown cover. Unlined pages. I don't know why I picked it up, but something about the empty space felt comforting. I took it to the small coffee shop attached to the store and sat by the window with a cup of black coffee and that untouched notebook in front of me. For nearly an hour, I didn't write a single word. I just stared at it. Like the silence between Marion and me had followed me all the way here. Eventually, I wrote something. A single line. I don't think we're coming back from this. And then another. But I'm not angry at you. I'm just tired of being no one in the life I built with you. I closed the notebook and sat with those words. They didn't bring relief. They didn't bring clarity, but they were real. More real than anything we'd said to each other in weeks. Months, probably. It was strange how truth could sit quietly on a page when it couldn't survive a conversation. That night, I came home and found Marian sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through something on her phone. She looked up when I walked in, not startled, not guilty, just aware. I set the notebook on the nightstand without saying anything. She glanced at it, then back at her screen. That was the entire exchange. Later, she turned off her light and rolled to her side. I stayed up, propped against the headboard, staring at the faint outlines of our room in the dark. The way her shoes were always slightly askew under the chair. The dresser drawer that never quite closed. The lamp we bought on a weekend trip to Asheville that now cast shadows instead of light. These things told the story of us more honestly than we ever had in recent memory. At some point, I whispered something. I didn't mean to say it out loud, but it came out of me like a breath I'd been holding too long. I think I stopped trying the moment I realized you stopped missing me. She didn't answer. I didn't expect her to. She might have been asleep. Or maybe she was just done responding to the version of me she no longer recognized. Either way, it was the first time I let myself admit the truth out loud. And even though no one responded, the air felt different. Not lighter, but clearer. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I didn't tell her where I was going. I just got in the car and drove. Nowhere in particular. I passed the park where we used to picnic in the fall, the one with the row of tall sycamores that drop golden leaves like paper confetti. I parked there, got out, and walked to the bench we used to claim as ours. It was empty. Of course it was. Everything was. I sat for a while, feeling the coolness of the metal seep through my coat, watching the wind dance through the trees. I thought about the first time I told her I loved her. I remembered the way her eyes widened like she hadn't expected it, even though we both had known it was coming. She'd kissed me before saying anything, holding the back of my neck like I was something precious. It was the kind of memory that hurt in a soft, quiet way, not sharp, not sudden, just sad. The kind of sadness that tastes like goodbye long before you say the word. And then I realized something I hadn't admitted until that exact moment. I was no longer staying because I believed we'd make it through. I was staying because I didn't know who I was without her. And that was no longer a good enough reason. I didn't leave that day. Not in the way people imagine it. Not with a slammed door or a suitcase thrown into the back seat. There was no final argument, no demands, no list of who kept what. What happened was quieter. Kinder, even. It began not with a goodbye, but with a question I had been avoiding for too long. What would it feel like to choose myself, not out of anger, but out of peace? The morning after my walk through the park, I came home feeling different. Not stronger, not braver, just quieter inside. Like something had finally settled. Marian was in the kitchen when I walked in, sipping her tea by the window. The light was hitting her face in a way that reminded me of years ago, back when mornings meant shared moments and casual laughter. She turned when she heard the door and for once, she actually looked at me. Not through me. Not past me. At me. I said her name softly. She waited. I walked closer, not to confront, but to connect, even just for a moment. And then I told her, in the clearest voice I'd used in months, I think we both deserve to feel alive again. Her mouth parted slightly. She didn't interrupt. I continued. This, whatever we've been doing, it's not love anymore. It's memory. It's habit. And I don't want either of us to keep pretending that's enough. She looked down at her cup, then out the window, then back at me. And to my surprise, she nodded. Just once. A slow, exhausted, I know kind of nod. And then, in a voice just above a whisper, she said, I stopped knowing how to reach you. And then I stopped trying. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was the closest thing to closure we'd ever given each other. We didn't cry. We didn't cling. We didn't spiral into old arguments. Instead, we stood in that quiet kitchen, holding the silence gently between us. I walked to the sink, poured us both some water, and we stood there, two people who had loved, lost, and somehow come to understand that letting go didn't have to mean failure. It could mean grace. Over the next week, we talked more than we had in months. Real conversations. Not about blame or what went wrong, but about what might come next. We agreed to separate with kindness. No war. No courtroom drama. Just space. She would stay with her sister for a while. I would stay in the house. We'd give ourselves the time and clarity we should have given each other years ago. The morning she packed her things, she left a note on the kitchen table, not a long one. Just a small piece of folded paper that read, "Thank you for the years. I hope you find joy again. I hope I do too." And just like that, She was gone. But the strange thing is, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like breath. It felt like the windows opening after a long, still winter. In the weeks that followed, I started to feel pieces of myself returning. I cooked real meals. I listened to music with the windows open. I started walking in the evenings, not to escape the house, but because the sunset was something I actually wanted to see again. I wrote in that notebook every morning, not about her, but about me. My thoughts. My fears. My small, quiet hopes. And one afternoon, at that same bookstore cafe, I met someone. Not romantically. Not yet. Just a stranger who smiled and said, "You come here often," and sat down across from me. We talked about books and dogs and the smell of rain on hot pavement. It was the kind of connection that didn't promise anything. It simply reminded me that I still had the capacity to connect. And maybe that's what healing really is, not some grand epiphany or dramatic transformation, but a slow returning to yourself. A steady rebuilding. A quiet, daily choosing of joy. I don't regret the years I spent with Marion. I don't regret the love we shared, the life we built, or even the silence that came between us. Because in that stillness, I found something I hadn't been listening for. The sound of my own voice. The rhythm of my own breath. The truth that I am still here, and I am still becoming. And maybe that's the most hopeful ending of all. Not that the love lasted, but that I did.